Amazon has a Stargate problem. In 2022, the company closed its acquisition of MGM, forming the new Amazon MGM Studios. And they bought the company, the historic studio, not only for its library of film and television going back decades, but for its IP. The intellectual property that it owns that Amazon has stated they want to continue on into the future. That's things like James Bond, Rocky and Creed, Pink Panther, Handmaid's Tale, Legally Blonde, and Stargate. Well, in the 3 years since the deal closed, they've announced new or continuing projects for virtually everything. And the crown jewel for MGM, of course, is Bond. There was a bit of a logjam, which you might have seen in the news recently was finally broken. The logjam for Bond was Amazon's not being able to come to terms with Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, producers who had inherited from their father, one of the original Bond producers, certain rights, certain creative controls over things like casting Bond and scripts for the next movie, etc. So it looked for a few years like Bond was just going nowhere. They weren't going to be able to come to terms. And what was Amazon's solution? They bought them outright. They just gave them another $1 billion on top of the $8.5 billion that Amazon paid for MGM itself. And they got their rights. They just bought them outright. Now Amazon can do what they want with Bond. So the problem for Stargate is twofold. First, how do you navigate the rights to characters created by different sets of writers? But more significantly, how do you revive a franchise that left the airways more than 15 years ago, but still has a very active fan base clamoring for a revival? I think for a new company like Amazon coming in, it's fair to say that reboots are just easier. Wipe the slate clean, close off the door to what was in the past, and make something brand new in the Stargate IP. You get a clean slate for the lore and for viewer expectations, and the new writers that you bring in aren't hampered by having to understand how the universe works, what its history is, etc. Problem is, most fans don't want a reboot. I know I certainly don't. A faithful continuation not only gives you a built-in audience, but potentially people who want to cheer you on and help promote the show. But the flip side of that is a real risk. Amazon risks an audience that not only doesn't want to support the project, but might actively rally against it, because they feel like the studio is trashing something that they love and not handling it with respect. And they just don't trust that the executives, left to their own devices, aren't going to screw this up. Take the Lord of the Rings show, for example. Amazon spent a lot of money acquiring the rights from the Tolkien estate and then producing the Rings of Power, and they seem to have a hit show, at least in terms of global viewership. But there's a vocal set of Tolkienites who won't let any opportunity pass to trash the show and its creative choices. If you doubt that, just look at the comments below. All these years later, Stargate fans still feel cheated out of how Stargate Atlantis and Stargate Universe ended. Both of those shows were canceled before their stories were done for reasons that I think were not their fault. So now we have essentially two unresolved cliffhangers hanging out there. Atlantis needs to return to the Pegasus Galaxy to continue the fight against the Wraith, and Destiny is crossing the void between galaxies with the crew in stasis and Eli's fate unknown. So how can Amazon have its Stargate cake and eat it too? How can they satisfy fans and set up the franchise for a future where it might go in a new direction? I've been covering Stargate at Gateworld for 25 years, and I've been thinking about Amazon's problem for a while. I think I have a solution. I'm not going to claim this is 100% original, but I think it's the best way forward for a franchise that's really in a complicated situation. Before we get to the big question of a reboot or a continuation, let's address the issue of rights. Roland Emmerich made a comment in a recent interview where he said he didn't think that Stargate could be done, at least not by him, because the rights were complicated. Well, we know, of course, that the original Stargate feature film was created by Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin. The project was funded by international investors and eventually sold off to MGM. So when it comes to the Stargate IP and the franchise broadly speaking, MGM owns the whole thing outright. But the studio then brought in new writers to create the TV series. Stargate SG-1 was created by Jonathan Glassner and Brad Wright, who created new characters like Teal'c, Samantha Carter, George Hammond, and others. This is the creative team that introduced the Asgard and the Tok'ra, the Goa'uld System Lords, all those pieces of the fabric that we know and love from the TV universe. A few years later, Brad Wright co-created Stargate Atlantis and then Stargate Universe with Robert C. Cooper. Of course, those shows introduced new characters, and the writers have some rights. We don't know exactly what is in their contract, but some rights to the characters that they created. So this, for example, is why Jack O'Neill and Daniel Jackson show up in the Atlantis pilot, but they avoided using Teal'c or Carter. Everything from the movie they basically own outright, but Jonathan Glassner had helped to create those two characters. So if you launch a new series using those characters as a launch point, I think the worry is there's at least a risk that Glassner could come back and make some financial claim to every episode of the series. So no Sam and no Teal'c in the Atlantis pilot Rising, but of course they did eventually come into the series in a guest capacity. Amanda joined the cast for season 4. So if Amazon is considering continuing something from the past, there's at least a chance that there are contractual obligations to Brad and Rob, Joe Malazzi and Paul Mully, other people who created certain characters. They might have to at least pay them residuals, but in some cases, maybe even get their sign-off for using those characters again, a character like Colonel Samantha Carter. This is my speculation at least. We don't know what's in those guys' contracts, but it would make sense of what Emmerich was saying about the rights being complicated. So what's Amazon's solution to this problem? Just do the work of securing the rights from the people who hold them, paying residuals, or just buy them outright with a lump sum. You've already proven that you can do this with Michael Wilson and Barbara Broccoli. If that's what it takes to get a continuation of Stargate, just throwing a bunch of money at the problem, Amazon certainly has deep enough pockets to do that. The bigger problem for Amazon MGM Studios is, of course, the creative direction. Do we wipe the slate clean and reboot Stargate from the beginning, or do we continue what fans know and what millions of fans around the world still love and want to see come back? And for that matter, should we go straight to series, or maybe do a movie, a streaming movie, or a theatrical release that sets up a series that follows later? There's lots of different moving pieces here. Amazon MGM Studios wants to do something new with Stargate, but we hear that there are voices inside MGM cautioning them not to act hastily and burn fans. That goodwill is a precious resource, and they only get one shot at keeping it. So here's the solution. Apart from greenlighting multiple projects at the same time, which would be costly and carry greater financial risk, the solution that at least has the potential to make everyone happy is an anthology series. Start with one season, 6 to 8 episodes to keep costs down, with different writers telling different Stargate stories. The model here is Black Mirror, or The Outer Limits, standalone episodes, each with its own setting, characters, and plot, but all within the same continuity. Call it Stargate Adventures, or Stargate Mission Files, or something clever. One episode is an Earth-based story. Maybe one follows the Tok'ra, or the Free Jaffa. They don't have to be at the same point in the timeline, and they don't all have to have humans from Earth. Do an episode about the Ancients showing up in our galaxy for the first time, and why they created the gate system. And here's the key, bring back at least some of the Atlantis cast for some kind of closure, and the same with SGU and Destiny's Mission. You don't need the whole cast, you don't need to rebuild the entire set. Be creative, be efficient with your resources, just like Brad Wright and Jonathan Glassner were when they were making The Outer Limits back in the 90s. That's a show that used a new cast and new sets every single week. The anthology format fell out of favor for several years, but Black Mirror has really demonstrated that it fits well in the streaming world. There's no cliffhangers, there's no guarantee of future seasons, and if one episode doesn't strike your fancy, just move on to the next one. But yeah, one episode of the Stargate anthology has to be Atlantis, and one has to be Universe. And those are Joe and Paul and Brad and Rob's stories, so the original creators need to come back to finish them off properly. Will that be hard? Probably. Will it cost more than it ought? Possibly. But if you're a studio executive, it's your job to make the deal, and you're starting out in a hole. This is going to help you dig your way out of it so that you can then move forward and do what you want with Stargate. That's where the rest of the anthology comes in. You have at least 4 more standalone episodes to experiment with. Try new things. Give different creative teams a chance to play around in the Stargate universe and see what they come up with. You might get a stinker or two, or you might get the USS Callister, a Black Mirror story so popular that fans wanted it to get an entire spin-off series. And now in the new season, it's finally getting a sequel. That's what an anthology series can do for Stargate. Not just tie up loose ends from the past, but provide a laboratory for figuring out where Stargate goes from here. Maybe that's a brand new show based on one of the episodes that worked really well. Maybe it's a second season of the anthology series. Just keep it going until you find something that works. Something that people have seen and responded to positively. Or do both. Launch a new show and keep the anthology series going. Build a whole universe out of it. So here's why I think this is the best plan for the future of the Stargate franchise. For fans, it obviously gives us the closure that we've needed, that we've wanted and asked for so many years. But it also creates an environment where the studio can move Stargate forward into the future. And yeah, that might involve doing something new with new characters, new writers, and a new creative direction. The anthology format provides the opportunity for the best of both worlds. For the studio, this effectively unshackles the franchise from its past baggage. You get this wonderful science fiction universe to play in without millions of people around the world who still have a chip on their shoulder because they loved something, it was canceled prematurely, and then you spent a bunch of money to bring it back, but then told them that the stories and characters they loved aren't important. I would bet that if fans are given this token amount of closure and presented with new characters and new stories in a non-threatening, one-off way, you're going to get a lot of skeptics and naysayers on board. You won't get everyone. People will still enjoy going on the internet and complaining, but you will get a whole lot more than if you swept everything under the rug, hired a new writer to reboot the franchise, and just hoped for the best. What do you guys think of this proposal for solving Amazon's Stargate problem? Let us know in the comments down below that like button. Thanks to everyone for your support for Gateworld, including our channel members, whose names you're seeing right here. If you want to learn more about channel membership and see some videos early, click on the join button down below. Since we launched channel memberships last month, I've discovered that the join button doesn't always show up on mobile, and I think that's because Apple takes a cut if you sign up on an iPhone. So go to a desktop browser and look for the join button if you want to learn more. Special thanks to our patrons Benjamin Schrenk and Martin Zokor, and a special shout out to Akos, aka Platshoe, who is a longtime friend and supporter of this site. If you want to see more Stargate content on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.